Neal, where are we in the development of the cannabis market in the US?
We're in a very interesting place. So right now, under federal law, we are completely illegal. There is no such thing as adult use cannabis. There is no such thing as medical marijuana. There is no such thing as a legal or regulated marketplace. However, we have a system of government that is based on federalism, and we have about 36 states and territories that have opted out of prohibition in some form. We have 11 states, excuse me, and 2 territories that have opted out of prohibition entirely. So we have really intense regulation on the state level. Some states are complete prohibition. Some states have medical marijuana markets. Some states have adult use markets. Every state is its own fiefdom with its own set of regulations where product cannot cross state borders. So we have where we are right now. Now, obviously, that does not only can we not cross state borders, but then we obviously can't cross international borders. We can't be listed on American stock exchanges, and we have some American companies that have listed on the Canadian exchange and have gone public and brought some of that public money down to the states, and they're investing. So we're in this odd place of acceptance and legality at the state level to total prohibition at the state level, depending what state you're in, and a federal government that has stuck its head in the sand and is ignoring it all. So we are at a place now where the federal government must act. The Attorney General of the United States testified in front of the U.S. Senate a couple months ago that it is untenable, this dichotomy between federal and state law, and so we need Congress to act. The people have spoken. It polls 2/3 supermajority for setting up adult use markets in this state. While the states are doing a very good job regulating and the sky hasn't fallen in any of these places, we haven't seen a spike in people driving while high. We haven't seen a spike. In fact, we've seen a statistically relevant decline in youth usage of cannabis. Regulation works better than prohibition, and we've just reached the point now where the states are going to continue to do this, and we need some sort of federal regulatory oversight and guidance. We've reached that point, and we're also ceding an industry that has largely come out of the states to other countries that are moving forward with full federal legalization for no reason outside of bad policy. So we're in an interesting mix.
Given where we are from a regulatory perspective, and assuming that we'll get the legislation passed that will continue to support the growth of the industry, what does the industry need to start thinking about now to ensure it's sustainable over the long term?
Yeah, well, to assume, right? So let's presume, but it's going to take a lot of work to get there, and that's kind of what we're doing. We have a very large federal lobbying team. We're pushing really hard. We're very optimistic about being able to pass some substantial cannabis policy reform through this Congress. Don't know what the event horizon is in total federal legalization and regulation. What the industry can do between now and then, to be completely honest, is because we have no federal oversight, because we are not regulated at the federal level, we have this patchwork of standards as well. And so our organization is looking at ways that we can be self-regulating, and what businesses can in the short term reinvest into their communities that they operate, make sure that they have diverse hiring practices and boards, and make sure that we are setting product standards either through a self-regulatory standard or participating with entities like ASTM International, or making sure that you're sourcing materials from third-party providers that are GMP standards and ISO certified, right? So what we can start to do is we can start to take on some of this regulatory burden ourselves, so to see where the industry is coming. But there's a huge wrinkle in that, but putting that onto the individual businesses, which is because we're federally illegal, we get caught in a section of the tax code that's 280E. And what that says, in short, what it means is we're taxed on our revenue, not our profits. What it says is if you traffic in a Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 controlled substance, and cannabis is Schedule 1 federally, you may not take any standard business deductions outside the true cost of goods sold. So that means that cannabis businesses have an effective federal tax rate of 80% or higher. So then it's very easy to say, well, look at what's coming down the pipe and self-regulate and make sure that you're meeting all these standards that don't exist for your industry yet but exist in other industries, and self-adopt, while you're also taking all of the revenue and all the profit out of these businesses, which makes it very hard for those businesses to do. So it all comes back to, we need Congress to act. We need movement on the federal level. We've reached that point. The most important thing that businesses can do in the short term is reinvest into their communities, reinvest into their people, make sure that they have diverse boardrooms and workforces, and that they're mirroring other industries that we have in this country, because from our inception, we do have a bit of a diversity problem coming out the gate, and a lot of that has to do with how the industry is rolled out.
We talked a little bit about diversity there in terms of clearly there are historical challenges of people who are in prison or have served long prison sentences for possession. Is the industry looking at equality and inclusion in terms of ways in which communities of color in particular have been affected and will have now opportunities in the cannabis industry going forward?
Yeah, so there are individual companies that have started initiatives. There are certain state programs that have gone heavily into making sure that there is some diversity in how we're looking at how these companies are made up, how the licenses are distributed. But again, because you have this patchwork of state law, it all goes back to federal law. Look, there's three inarguable facts. Number one is the war on drugs disproportionately targeted people and communities of color, particularly black people. Fact number two is the vast majority of the war on drugs has been cannabis. And fact number three is about 90% of all cannabis arrests in this country are for simple possession. So when you put those three facts together, there is no path to legalization in this country that does not account for the harms that the policy of prohibition has done on society by disproportionately impacting communities and these people. No one should be in prison for something that's no longer illegal. We should have anyone who is there for just a simple marijuana possession charge in a state that's legal or federally legal should be released. Their record should be expunged. Even if you're not in prison, even if you have a criminal record and you never spent any time in prison or jail, you have all these cascading effects that come with just a conviction where you're denied student loans, mortgages, potentially your right to vote. There's a lot of things that impact your way of living. As an organization, CTF, we're only a year old, and we are positioning ourselves to be a self-regulatory organization as a trade association, and we have formed a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force. We've assembled some leading civil rights leaders and industry folks from throughout the country, and we're currently doing the work right now, but the goal of the task force the main goal, there's a few things that the task force is tasked with doing, but the main goal is to develop an internal policy that gets adopted by the Cannabis Trade Federation board that, like our ethics policy today, becomes a condition of membership. So if you won't sign off on our DEI policy, you cannot be a member. So that group is currently working on creating that policy. We hope to bring it to the board within a couple of months. And then when you take a look at who makes up our board, 6 of the multi-state operators, the largest operators in Colorado, largest operator in California, and some other folks, we have pretty wide-ranging adaptation throughout the entire American industry just by our board agreeing to do it. It becomes an instant sort of self-regulating policy. So we're working on that. And the answer is, we didn't know what the answer was. So we assembled a bunch of people who do this to advise us, to help us figure this out as an industry. So this is something, we have over 400 years of history in this country that tilt the playing field against certain folks, and we're an industry that is coming out of a policy that directly targeted some of these folks that already have the playing field tilted against them. So whatever we can do to help balance that we're forming a new industry. There's no reason we can't all win, right? We're creating the rules as we go, and there's no reason why as industry we can't be a force and a voice for good, for equity, for diversity, for equality in our industry, and as an organization that's what we intend to do.
Last question. as you think about where the industry goes, are there any particular things that either keep you up at night or make you particularly optimistic in terms of the path forward? Are we at a tipping point? What do you think?
It's the same thing that makes me optimistic and keeps me up at night. There are over 200,000 Americans that work in the legal cannabis industry today. Every single one of those people could have been arrested for a felony for coming to work today. Every single one. They can't get mortgages, they can't get car loans. This conflict between federal and state law must end. So it keeps me up at night that our people who just show up to provide for their family and just do what is a normal job that's no different than any other industry, risk their freedom, risk their finances, risk a time with their family simply for going to work. That keeps me up at night. The flip side of that is I think that growing pressure is what's going to finally move Congress to act.
Thank you very much indeed. Very much appreciated.